It's June 10th, 2015, and welcome to another edition of Bite Marks Cafe, where we serve you the first bite of today's technology. I'm Bert Lum.
And I'm Ryan Ozawa. We'll start things off today with a couple of special guests who are here to tell us about a couple of special upcoming events. Bryan Butteling from Sultan Ventures is here to tell us about the next Honolulu Startup Weekend. Then Ian Kitajima returns to fill us in on a Design Thinking Bootcamp.
And finally, we'll talk about the sharing economy with Ben Trevino from Bike Share and Aaron Landry from Car2Go.
Can we transform transportation and improve our quality of life by rethinking the culture of ownership? Of course, we'd love your questions as well and thoughts as part of that conversation, so be ready to call in or tweet.
And first, now joining us is Bryan Butteling, and he's here to tell us about the next Startup Weekend, which is actually been kind of building up, right? I mean, Bryan?
Yeah. Hi guys. Thank you for having me again. This is always fun joining you guys.
Well, you know, the Startup Weekend is like a pretty happening thing. I mean, there was the Maui event
Yeah,
just a little more than a month ago. And
it's been a very busy month in my life with Startup Weekend. But it's pretty much, it's a passion of mine. It's, what we like to pride ourselves on is we're cultivating that entrepreneurship community. And now that we've just done our second one on Maui, and we've grown from 30 participants last year in 2014 to have almost 80 participants at our last event in May, really shows that people are interested, and not only interested, but they're being inspired by other people to become, not necessarily maybe become entrepreneurs, but learn that startup mindset and that entrepreneurial mindset. And so now we're looking for our seventh event here in Honolulu next week, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And like you said, Bert, we've been building up to it. This year was the first time ever we've done a series of workshops.
yeah, and those workshops I thought were pretty key in terms of the startup and entrepreneurial community, being that there's a lot of interest in sort of lean startup and agile, just the agile protocol or process that people might implement. Things like Scrum and you tell us about what is it that you started to kind of build up to get to Startup Weekend.
Yeah, so the conversation actually started last year. We've seen that we're witnessing this frustration with a lot of our participants where they knew what a startup was and they knew what an entrepreneur was and how to build a business, but they didn't realize what tools and resources were out there to manage and run a startup efficiently within a 54-hour period. And so these buzzwords started popping up like lean, Scrum, and whatnot. And so we looked around within our community and a lot of brainstorming with the team over at Sultan Ventures and their whole goal our whole goal with education. That was something that we really, really wanted to test. And we look at, all right, what are those three things that people look at in building a startup company? And the first, and then probably the lowest hanging fruit was that lean methodology, that lean framework, that Steve Case made so famous. And so we took a deep, deep dive into that on our first workshop, and then our workshop last week was all about agile project development and the Scrum, the Kanban board, and really how to project manage a team and have an end goal in mind, an end goal in sight. And it's perfect for a 54-hour event. I mean, you have so much to do, and yet you want to dedicate and manage that team efficiently and give everyone sort of accountability throughout that weekend. And we're like, this is perfect for our attendees. And so we've actually had a great turnout. We've had about 25 to 30 attendees, and we have our last workshop actually happening tomorrow at Sultan Ventures.
And the last workshop is also very important.
Yeah. So the last workshop I'll actually lead. It's going to be a pitch workshop, and so we're going to teach you the basics of what Startup Weekend is, and that'll be a quick 15-minute intro. But then we'll take a deep, deep dive into what is the weekend about, and then also that very, very important pitch, that pitch flyer that happens Friday night, which is basically translating that passion and idea that you have, that you come to the event with, to a crowd of people, and not only translating that, but encouraging people to join your team and to dedicate their next 54 hours of their life to work on that product and launch it.
Well, I like the idea that you kind of worked up, sort of lead up to this event. It is a significant event. I was surprised when one of my newer coworkers said, "Oh yeah, I went to one," and I was like, "Oh okay," and I wouldn't even have thought as a general business person that he would be interested in that. But there is that challenge where you have some people that are Startup Weekend veterans, and they're like, okay, so let's set up a Scrum board and do a SWOT analysis. Maybe I'm just thinking about Silicon Valley, but some tools that everybody understands, and some things that they're new to. So, what do you say is the makeup? I mean, of the group now? Are you seeing some really hardcore people that kind of come event to event twice a year or whatever, or are you seeing actually still more newcomers adding kind of new ideas and diversity to the operation? What's that breakdown?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ryan. So we've actually seen, again, over the last year, a shift. Before it used to be about 70% were return and 30% were new. But last year we had 2 events and there was 50-50 breakdown. We were just really, really surprised on that, and we're hoping that is the same outcome this year. And that's, we get about 100 people to attend and participate. So that's introducing, you think about it, 2 events, 100 new people to the entrepreneurial mindset over the year. And it's not only maybe to introduce them to what an entrepreneur is, but all these other things of, like you mentioned, like a Scrum board. You can do that to any position, any job, any industry, and just run your company more efficiently.
Yeah, in years past, companies have sent groups of their employees to Startup Weekend. I imagine that continues, so they can take those skills and those talents and just that creative thinking, outside of the box thinking, back to their company.
Yeah, and that's actually been a question I've been getting a lot from companies here locally. Is can we bring a team? And my suggestion is yes. I mean, it also gives employees that opportunity to empower themselves. And as an employer, you can look at, all right, who are my leaders within the team now? And who can I take out of their comfort zone and think more forward thinking of who are these people that I'm going to set up to be the executives of the company or the forward thinkers of the company.
Yeah, a lot of companies have kind of like change agents within them, and then I think sending them to this event is kind of how you seed that thought. One last question, because you had that good statistic in terms of the breakdown of newcomers and hardcore Startup Weekend fans. There's always that question too: is after Startup Weekend, you come, you pitch an idea, you build a quote unquote company, a startup idea. What do you see in terms of those continuing beyond? I mean, it's certainly not the majority. It's not even a minority. It's probably a small group, but there have been some success stories coming out of this event.
Yeah, there's been a ton of success stories. I mean, the big one obviously is Mintila. She pitched, I believe, 2 years ago. Just recently, Varsity Prep got that funding from Bubs, and they're continuing to run their startup. You also have Tiffany and Mark Quezada.
Oh, yes.
Even though their startup didn't make it through Startup Weekend, they were able to network and meet people, and now they launched Hobnob. And to me, I look at them as like the pivotal, person that you want attending these events. They're not doing it to, per se, launch a company and get a ton of money from it. It's the experience, it's the network, and learning all of that.
Right, and I don't think the pressure to find the company that goes IPO because they went to Startup Weekend should lie in your shoulders. But I like the fact that you've looked at ways of building the capacity or the understanding of going through like these lean methodologies. And then get them to go to Startup Weekend, so that Startup Weekend doesn't just stand alone as an event. And then after all of that experience, they actually come out with a better understanding of what it takes to be an entrepreneur, be a small business. And then maybe they can start to look at going into an accelerator or some other type of mentoring program. So I think that's a great sort of the ecosystem. I mean, you're definitely part of the ecosystem, building that capacity so that people can move on.
That actually leads to our last workshop, which we haven't announced yet, but it's going to be a month after. So we want to set a benchmark workshop afterwards where we're going to invite all of the stakeholders within the ecosystem to pitch who they are. So you have people like Sultan Ventures, Accelerate UH, Blue Startups, Energy Accelerator. The list goes on, and just bring them in here and say, hey, we are here to support you as entrepreneurs, and this is what the resources we have. These are the tools that we have, and and it's really, again, build that ecosystem and all that.
Do you see something happening to perhaps help the company that might not go the accelerator route and perhaps just start a small boutique tech business?
A lifestyle
business. I mean, and there's nothing wrong with that. But what is out there that would provide them the same or a similar support structure as perhaps an accelerator?
I mean, there's lots of things out there. There's anything from the SBA, the Small Business Administration, and they do a lot of work. Again, I mean, not to toot my own horn, but that's that's the reason why we all came together at Sultan Ventures, was to really hit on that point of people have this misconception that startups mean high growth tech company, but it's just taking a business model that is scalable and repeatable. And it could be lifestyle, it could be consultant, it could be a tech company. But, it's all about educating people on saying, hey, anything is possible, and here are the tools, and here's how to do it efficiently, and here are the success stories behind it.
Well, and you bring up a good segue back to the Maui event, because I think out of the Maui event, wasn't there a company that proposed like making pickles because there weren't any pickles on Maui? Fresh pickles?
Yeah, it was a great story. I mean, we had 8 companies pitch, 4 of which were tech related, 4 of which were lifestyle related, and within the top 3, we had a company called, I believe, Wailua Pickles, and all they wanted to do was take organic, locally grown pickles on Maui and be the main distributor to all of Hawaii. And it's perfect. I mean, it's scalable, it's repeatable.
I love the Periscope that was being shown. I mean, you were live streaming it, and the question was asked. I think it was maybe Omar, Sultan was asking. So what is the problem you're trying to fix?
Not enough pickles.
Exactly. That was the answer.
So if somebody wants to pitch their pickle idea or other need that they feel could be filled by a startup or a new business, where can they go? And once again, when is this event taking place?
Yeah. So for more information, you can go to honolulu.up.co. You can also follow us on Facebook at Startup Weekend Honolulu. Our Twitter handle is SWHNL, and then our event is next week, Friday, June 19th to the 21st. We have some awesome judges. We have some awesome sponsors. Hawaii National Bank is actually our fiscal sponsor this year for both events.
Former employer of mine. Fantastic.
Awesome. And last thing is we have a promo code. If you type in SWHNL right now, you'll get $10 off.
Okay, we'll put that up on our show notes.
Bryan, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
And in fact, Bryan is going to do a quick turnaround from that very busy, very dynamic Startup Weekend event to attend another event, which, similar to Bryan's event, helps you think differently and solve problems through process and engineering like that. Yes, joining us now in the studio to tell us about that event is longtime friend and Oceanit guru Ian Kitajima. Welcome to the show.
How's it, guys? Good to be back.
Now, Ian, you have really been a leader in the local community in a concept called design thinking. Goes back to Stanford, goes back to a lot of really great ideas and ways to make them germinate, idea, etc. So for those, though, who have not heard you on previous shows, I think it's been a while since we've had you talk about this boot camp. Why does somebody need design thinking in their lives?
I don't know if people need design thinking. So design thinking is a human-centered problem-solving process. So the way I think of it is, when somebody says, think outside the box, the next question is always, for me at least, is, well, how do you do that? Because if I knew how to do it, I'd be doing it. So design thinking is at least one form of a way to actually think outside the box. So it gives you a 5-step process to go through it. So it's basically empathy, define, ideate, prototype, and test. And so it's a great way, to kind of rewire your brain in a way to see problems and opportunities that you may not be able to see sometimes. So big companies, big and small, including Airbnb and Google and Apple and Facebook, and all of these companies have been starting to learn this process through Stanford and through IDEO, who are kind of known for being the guys who kind of kick it off. And so several years ago, we got involved from a company standpoint, but very early on, as we started learning the process, realized that this was a great way. It was a way to empower people with a way to think in a different way. And one of the great opportunities to use design thinking is on very complex problems, where it's very hard to imagine what the solutions are. So the more complex, the more difficult, the more you don't know what maybe the solution is, design thinking is really great for that. And so one of the really challenging, I think, issues we have, not just here in Hawaii, but across the nation, is around education. So that's where back in 2011, we did the first annual Design Thinking Hawaii Bootcamp, and very much focused around educators. And so this year is the 5th annual one. Again, very focused around educators. What's kind of nice is we have a whole team, a couple of teams from UH Hilo. We have a team from Hilo High School. of course, Waipahu High School and several other public schools, including elementary schools, private schools. But this year we'll also have a group of nonprofits, private companies as well, kind of joining us.
So, when you start to apply the design thinking process in education, how is it? Can you give us an example of how a team inside education might apply this methodology to perhaps come out with something that's more engaging for students?
So some, one very simple example I think is around when you think about being more human-centered. If you think about a school, who is really, in a sense, the customer, or who's the end user? It's the student. And so what was fascinating was to actually have students attend the boot camp and then take this process back to their school and actually teach it to educators as well as to other students, and then start to kind of redesign or reimagine what the classroom would be like, what lunch would be like, how they would learn math, how would they learn other things, but really driving it from the student's perspective on how they would want to learn things versus very top-down where I'm the teacher and this is the way I'm going to teach it to you, and I don't care, but it's a very top-down kind of approach,
Mm-hmm.
whereas all of a sudden the students are now empowered to be part of the process of how to think about education, because normally they're outside of the process. So design thinking works best when you can actually create these teams where the end users really become part of your design team.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything from school lunches to prom to whatever you can imagine to redesigning math curriculum is very exciting to see happening in the public schools.
Now, you're saying that this workshop, and I've been able to participate in a few, and I found them very fascinating. And in part, it's because you're learning a process, like you said. It's learning a way of thinking, a way of approaching a problem, the 5 different steps. But certainly, it's not a completely theoretical event either, in the sense that, especially since you're focusing on education, you're probably going to be putting up some genuine real-world challenges that educators face. We recently had Kamehameha Schools. They're doing their unconference, and they're also trying to help educators and give them the tools they need to teach more effectively. Do you have any preview or an example of one of the kinds of problems for Hawaii and for this particular event that
Sure.
you might put forward for them to try to attack?
So one of the things actually when you're first learning design thinking, especially just to let everyone knows, is it's not going to only be educators, right? So there's going to be a whole diversity of groups of people there. So what we try to do is not focus on a particular issue that's too close. And for example, we're not going to do a challenge around education because
Mm-hmm.
the purpose of the introductory bootcamp is to teach you the process. So we want you to focus on the process versus sometimes when you're an expert in an area and we bring in a topic in your subject area, you get stuck in that whole thing versus learning the process. So this year, actually, we're going to be doing a challenge around the kind of redesigning the voter experience.
Ah, that'd be interesting.
Yeah, so it's kind of this kind of way out there, but it's something I think a lot of people can engage with. The interesting thing about this year's boot camp is that there's 2 boot camps. So from June 22nd to the 24th is the introductory boot camp. And then from that Wednesday, the 24th to Friday is actually an intermediate boot camp.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the first year where we're going to actually be doing 2 boot camps for the entire week. Now, in the second boot camp, which is the intermediate boot camp, that's where you're going to bring your own team with your own challenge.
And then you actually approach
And you
it.
will then, we will help you through the process. Because this is typically for folks who have a lot more experience, but are kind of hitting the wall
Mm-hmm.
with a particular challenge or how they're using the process. And so the second half of the week will really be about teams bringing their biggest or one of their challenges and actually going through the process.
So I can certainly see examples of nonprofits or even companies, private companies, tackling that in that second session.
Yeah,
So
probably I think a lot of the small startups that are going through Startup Weekend might even
Yeah,
actually benefit
bring
from.
them over.
So Bryan will be there with us.
Yeah, no, sounds good. Well, so where can people find out more information?
So probably the easiest way is to just go online, Google Design Thinking Hawaii Bootcamp 2015. The registration information is online on eventbrite.com. Public school educators can go to the bootcamp for $250. We have a select number of scholarships still available. Otherwise, if you're private educator, school educator, or nonprofit is $1,250, and then for corporate folks on for-profit companies, it's $2,500.
All right. Well, definitely the educators can see what bargain they're getting
That's
with
true.
this process. Well, thanks, Ian, for joining us today.
And of course, we'll take a short break, and when we return, we'll be joined by Ben Trevino and Aaron Landry to talk about car sharing, bike sharing, and the sharing economy.
Will we be able to give up our attachment to owning things and collectively meet our transportation needs? We'd, of course, love your questions as well. As part of that conversation, you give us a call at 941-3689, or you can reach us toll-free from the neighbor islands at 877-941-3689.
And of course, we're live here in the studio. You can tweet us your questions at Bytemarks or at Hawaii. This is Bytemarks Cafe. All right. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you, Brian.
guys.
Yeah, thank you.
That does sound like a busy week.
No, yeah, no. It almost sounds like
He's not going to get any sleep.
pretty soon we'll have these big lean startup workshops like
Yeah,
design.
I want to know. I want to know.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Ian.
Oh, man. All right. Rough in there. Good luck, guys.
Far chair? You want the far chair?
You want to sit in the corner, do you?
Yeah, consider These things work.
Let's see. Who shall we start with? Who's further along? I think Ben, you're probably further along.
I don't think so.
Huh?
They're much closer to launch than we are.
Really?
We don't have a launch date.
But we don't even have money.
Okay.
Well, there's that.
What money?
We don't have money yet.
You don't need money?
We don't have all the money.
We'll start with a general thing about sharing. Okay, we'll start with. Welcome back to Bytemarks Cafe. I'm Bert Lum.
And I'm Ryan Ozawa.
And joining us today is Ben Trevino and Aaron Landry. Ben is the president COO of Bike Share Hawaii. Of course, he's also the one of the founders of Inter Island Terminal, a Honolulu-based nonprofit organization with projects including community spaces, the Kakako Agora, an R&D bookstore and cafe. I love those spots.
Aaron, meanwhile, is, in addition to being a Snapchat star,
That's
the
right.
general manager of Car2Go Hawaii. He has experience in media, technology, politics, and, of course, just getting things done. He's driven by big ideas and making life better for everyone.
And of course, how difficult is it to overcome the desire for ownership? And of course, we'd love to hear your comments and questions. And that number to call is 941-3689 on Oahu, or 877-941-3689 from the neighbor islands. We want to welcome you both to Bytemarks Cafe.
Hey, it's awesome to be here. Thanks for inviting us out.
Thanks for having us.
Hey, so the idea of let's start with the idea of sharing, the sharing economy. What exactly is the sharing economy, and why is it gaining in popularity? And Aaron, maybe you can share some of your thoughts.
Well, I think the sharing economy is about the idea where you don't have to own every single thing that you use. And there's a lot of sharing economy aspects now where there might be a community pool, for example, and multiple people can use the pool versus everybody having a house with their own pool. There's certainly more of that, but once you start applying it to services and property that people would normally own, such as a car or a bike, it becomes a little bit more complicated than a pool. But there's constructs on how people will pool together to do that. Excuse the pun.
Sure. Well, I mean, I work in real estate among other things, and one of the trends that's front page for our industry right now, of course, is the ongoing increase of people who are renting rather than owning homes or being more mobile. In terms of staying in one place for very long. And when you talk about car sharing, it's that you can borrow a car, rent a rental car for a day. And so more and more people are kind of not looking forward to picking up those large, expensive assets that are almost major life decisions for the average middle-class person, and saying, you know what, I don't even need to worry about car payments, mortgage payments. My life is simpler without those things. And it also has industry worried. Car dealerships probably worried. People who sell houses obviously are worried about that. But on the other hand, we've been hearing about this for a while. I can think of maybe 5 or 6 startups in the last 10 years that says, hey, we'll set this up for your neighborhood. You can all share your riding mower, and nobody else needs to buy a riding mower. But they don't last very long. So on one hand, you can sort of see the human benefit of sharing things, but maybe kind of a resistance both on the businesses that might lose business and maybe even the people who like to own their own writing more. What is happening now, do you think, that might give these concepts greater heft?
I think it has to do with it's in some ways a generational thing too. I think a lot of younger people are seeing how expensive it is to own certain things, whether it be a house or a car or even like a nice bike. So I think people are thinking about different ways to share those things. It's like, well, maybe I only want to use something for a short period of time. And I think our media has also changed in that way too. I mean, people used to subscribe to magazines. A lot of people still subscribe to magazines, and now it's a little bit more disposable. I mean, people will get snippets and shorter segments, and they don't care if they keep it, or they don't care if they even bookmark it on a website anymore. They just figure, well, if I need to find that article, I can just find it again.
Actually, and now that you bring that up, it makes me think of my own practices. I used to be an MP3, or first a CD hoarder. Actually, first a cassette tape hoarder, then a CD hoarder.
Not a record
then
hoarder,
an MP3 hoarder. And then now,
Hoarder.
I can't even remember the last time I put those music files on my phone or my computer because I just stream RDO or Spotify or Google Music or Apple Radio, so I can see that. Now, Ben, what's your take on this as I would say, a representative of that next generation that might not necessarily aspire to owning that large 5 or 6 figure investment? What do you think is driving more people toward the sharing economy?
Well, I think you and Aaron both touch on this to some extent, which is that you need to provide this compelling alternative to ownership, right? I mean, the benefit of ownership is that you don't have to, not everyone likes living with roommates because roommates can crowd your style. They may not have the same philosophy on taking care of nice things that you might have. But at the same time, if you can provide a service or if you can create a mechanism that allows people to get something better, right, to really add value to the experience of doing something, say riding a bike or taking a car, using a car for an errand, then I think that's where the sharing economy starts to kick in. We've always shared things. I mean, we have libraries, there are community pools, like Aaron was mentioning, and now I think what we're seeing with the sharing economy is that items for which we didn't have mechanisms that made sharing effective, right? The riding mower, there's a little bit too much tied up in ownership to make a community riding mower really a compelling thing, because somebody might break it and then everybody loses, right? But with something like bike share, and I will talk about bike share because that's what I know about at this point. Something like bike share, if you need to ride a bike, owning your own bike can be kind of a hassle, especially from a maintenance standpoint. So if you have 2,000 bikes that you have access to from a public standpoint, that can be very attractive. The bikes are always where you need them. You never have to worry about fixing them. And so the idea that you would have to own your own bike, figure out where you're going to get it fixed, it has a flat tire, now you're out of luck, those considerations never come into play. All the hassles that are associated with ownership go away.
So, Ben, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, when you talk about some of these large ticket items, I mean, when you decide you want to rent instead of own a home, I can see where the decision might be to unshackle yourself from all the things that tie you down by having, to own a home. And similarly with a car, people might go through the financial decision of, I have to buy insurance, I have to pay for gas, I have to do maintenance. And if you start to add up all those costs, then it might make sense to look at a car sharing type of economy. When you look at bike sharing, what do you think are some of the major problems that you're solving with sharing a pool of bikes?
Well, bike sharing is, when you think of bike sharing, the first word that jumps out is bike, and so you're automatically in this frame of mind. It's replacing my personal bike, which isn't strictly what bike sharing is about.
Okay.
It's a piece of a larger transportation ecosystem that says I can ride a bike to this bar, but then at the bar I do something that makes me no longer capable of riding the bike back safely.
Okay.
And so I'm going to take a cab instead. And you can string together one-way trips that make sense because we live in a rich transportation ecosystem. We don't have to drive everywhere ourselves. Maybe you catch a ride with a friend, maybe you take an Uber, maybe you take a car share.
So explain how the bike share works. And so I can catch a bike I can pick up a bike from wherever the bike is stationed, and then I can drive it to a bar, and lock it up outside the bar,
right?
And then I can catch a Uber back home.
So the way a typical bike share configuration, if you've seen a system like City Bike in New York or Capital Bike Share in DC, it is a network of public bikes that are accessible via these docking stations. And so the docking station includes a kiosk where you can pay for a short-term or long-term membership to access the bikes, and then you can also check the bike out, essentially. And so you can take this bike from any station where they're available, and typically they're laid out very densely, so there's always one within walking distance of another, and bike it to any other location where there's docks. And it makes the whole transaction very simple because you never have to worry about finding a rack to put it in or kind of understanding where something's going to be. You just assume that there's always going to be stations near the destinations you want to go to.
I was recently in Washington, D.C., in fact, a couple of weeks ago, or maybe a month ago now, and I was really impressed by the Capital Bike Share you said it was. They were truly everywhere I went, and of course, after as walkable as that city is, there was that point where I was like, you know what, I think bikes probably would have been better, and I did toy with the idea of giving it a shot. Now I'm kind of regretting I didn't. Now, we're talking to Ben Trevino and Aaron Landry about the sharing economy, about Bike Share Hawaii and Car2Go Honolulu, and ways that we can shun ownership and still get where we need to go. If you've got a question or a thought, you can give us a call at 941-3689 or toll free from the neighbor island at 877-941-3689. We're also listening for you on Twitter. Now, Aaron, I've been excited about Car2Go too. You talk about maintenance costs and things that come with owning a car. That's, I would say, a higher bar than there would be for a bike. But Ben mentioned a couple of times, and a lot of people, when they think sharing economy, they think of that disruptive transportation network company, Uber, which is like ride sharing. So a lot of times I think people might confuse Uber or ride sharing or Lyft with car sharing, like Car2Go. How do you, is that a distinction that you need to be able to make?
Yeah, I mean, car share is quite a bit different. It's more, I mean, what's similar to ride-sharing companies is you use an app to find a car. But the beauty is it's actually very similar to bike share in a way, where you use an app to find where a car is or where a bike is in the case of bike share, and then you drive it yourself. It's an on-demand vehicle that you can use, and you just pay by the minute. So it's very similar to bike share in the sense, too, that you just go from point A to point B. And so that might be where some of the confusion is, too. But it's closer related to a rental car because it is indeed like a short-term rental that you would do by the minute.
Right, you don't get a driver. Nobody's going to pick you up. You just happen to have a car waiting for you at the base of your building, and you can drive it someplace else for that.
Exactly.
So in the case of the, I guess in both of your cases where you have the lot or the docking stations where the bikes are, you pick it up. I mean, you've got a subscription. You can take it to wherever your destination is. If you're going to, let's say, a restaurant and you park your car to go, do you have to then return it back to the parking lot that you picked it up from?
No, and that's actually one of the beautiful things about how Car2Go works is if you take certain neighborhoods, like I like to dine at Town in Kaimuki, and there's a couple of restaurants in Waikiki that are also really, really busy, and a couple of restaurants in downtown that I visit frequently. And the issue around those places is that there's a real issue with parking. And so when you park your Car2Go vehicle there, that car is immediately available for somebody else to use. So compared to somebody else who might just park there and it might sit there for 3 hours, somebody who's leaving the restaurant or somebody else could actually take that vehicle and go somewhere else with it. So there's a higher churn or turnover of these parking spaces that make it more efficient. And so when you are ready to leave, and you can make a decision. Well, do I want to use Car2Go, or do I want to use bike share? Or do I want to take a taxi, or do I want to take the bus? And if you choose Car2Go, you can just look at your app and find out where the nearest car happens to be at that time.
Oh, interesting. So let's say you went to the restaurant, you parked your car or your Car2Go, you are done, it's gone. So now you have to choose what other options that you might have. But if it's still there, the time between you parked it and the time between that you finished your dinner, you're not paying for it anymore, right? I mean, you're not paying.
That's correct.
Right.
I mean, there's a couple additional options too. Like if you park a Car2Go car and you want to absolutely make sure that car stays there when you get back, you can pay for it to stay there.
I see.
So that's one of the options, and it's the same rate.
Right.
And then there's discounted rates too if it's more than an hour and stuff
Okay,
like that
well,
too. But another option too that's on our app is you can set what's called a radar. So let's say you're going to leave this restaurant in about a half hour, you can set up a little radar which says, maybe within 500 feet or a mile or a kilometer or whatever distance you want, and say, just give me a push notification when a car ends up here. And and then the car can come up, and then you can say, oh, I want this car, and then you can reserve it for up to 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So we try to resolve a lot of these issues of people trying to find cars and try to make it as convenient as possible for them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I definitely want to talk about some of the logistics, because I can imagine already where, let's say you're talking about the lantern floating in Magic Island, and people find their way to the mall, they shop there, they're okay, they might have taken the bus there or such, and they're all going to one major event, and then they decide that after the lanterns are floating that they all want to go home at the same time, and suddenly if you had 100 or 50 bikes at Ala Moana or 30 Car2Go cars at Ala Moana, they're all gone.
You get wiped out.
So at some point, how do you basically hope that the network effect and the movement of people keeps that churn rate natural? Or is there some point where you might have to reposition these bikes, Ben?
So special events are a major topic of conversation for bike sharing systems around the country, and I was just on a phone call about it. So one major example of an event that wipes out a bike share fleet is South by Southwest.
Mm-hmm.
So Austin has a bike sharing system called Austin B-Cycle, and every time, when South by comes into town, they just get destroyed with activity, and bikes move in certain patterns, and the rebalancing task becomes much more difficult because all the activity is concentrated around the convention center and other key locations in Austin. So the solutions to those things there is no natural system rebalancing at that point. And there are ways to, the thing that happens though is that you still create this benefit, right? The fact that there's a system in place means that you can still supply, you can redeploy your resources to meet the demand that's created by this event. So there are these things that are called bike share valets, where they'll essentially stock trucks or containers of bikes in these ad hoc corrals that you can use to check out bikes and meet the demand as it comes up.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm curious. So when you start to look at the economic model in any city, there has to be some equation that you base the number of bikes you want to purchase for that metropolitan area that meets the peak demand and maybe the normal kind of demand, and somewhere in between is where the optimal level of bike investment is.
Right.
I mean, can you kind of give us a sense of the thought process that might go through, when you start to deploy in Honolulu, how many bikes do we actually deploy?
Well, the system that we're planning is going to include about 2,000 bikes.
Mm-hmm.
And how that number was arrived at is, you never really know. It's a really dynamic system. Every day that the bike lane is in effect, right, changes the demand for more bicycling, right? It makes it, when you enable people to bike safely, then you create more demand for things like bike share. And then as the bikes come in, it may create even more demand. And then as locations are or are not successful, you may recycle your assets more efficiently, which means that you don't have to have as many bikes because the system will, gets used. You can use a bike 5 times a day instead of 2 times a day, and not necessitate the need for.
I would imagine
bikes.
that this is certainly a challenge for a fun challenge for, say, big data people, and trying to sort out sociologists, even city planners, civic planners. Aaron, for the logistics for Car2Go, you said that parking is always an issue. I would imagine it's safe to say that a Car2Go car, although cute and very small, I think it's a smart car.
Yes.
Still takes a little more space than a bike does, and can take a parking space. And there are sometimes challenges where, let's say, if everybody's taking their Car2Go to Waikiki Beach, there's a lot of Car2Gos left there, and other people might say, well, I wanted to go into Waikiki, but there's all these Car2Gos there as well. So there's probably more of an outreach element and community engagement element to make sure that they understand that these were cars that might have been brought in from someone's home, but it's just a different way, and in fact it moves more frequently than maybe Uncle from Waianae bringing his car into Waikiki. It can move more quickly. What have you done in terms to assuage any concerns over Car2Go cars, which is what someone might say, that's more cars in Honolulu, period, that it's not as bad as that sounds?
Right. Well, first of all, we actually, very similar to how a bike share program works, we have a fleet team that works on this rebalancing. And we also study the different patterns and how people move cars, depending on the time of the day of the week, even with temperature and weather. So we can kind of look at like how are people moving around, and why are they moving where they are. And so we're able to predict a lot of times like where there's going to be higher concentrations of vehicles, or where it's going to be a little bit more difficult for somebody to find one. So we actually do a rebalancing internally to try to make sure we alleviate that and help serve where we can predict people will be needing vehicles.
You know, and I think this is a fascinating discussion, because I think once you understand how it's operating in a particular area, you can start to see how to perhaps expand beyond that area.
Exactly.
So we want to hold that thought. We'll take a short break to continue our conversation with both Ben Trevino and Aaron Landry about bike share and Car2Go.
And what does the technology piece look like for these car sharing and bike sharing enterprises? We'd, of course, love to hear from you as well. You can give us a call at 941-3689 or 877-941-3689 from the neighbor islands. We have comments and Periscope live video viewers on Twitter, so we'll watch for you as well. You're listening to Bite Marks Cafe. How we doing?
Good, I think. How are we doing?
Yeah, good. So I want to talk a little bit more about the modeling. I mean, just briefly, and then how do you expand? How do you decide, to expand beyond the area that you're going to start with?
Okay.
Perfect.
And then maybe
Great.
a little bit about the technology that's enabling you to do this.
Okay.
Yeah.
All good. All great topics.
Oh, and then eventually, maybe if we have time, we can talk about some of the policy work that needs to happen.
Okay.
If we have time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's
Well-
sexy.
Well, I
Also,
would
This is
end up-
dangerous. I'm not sure.
Well,
Oh, yeah.
I'll trick you and I'll switch it and start talking about neighborhood boards. So I can talk about that forever. It's part of it.
Welcome back. This is Bite Marks Cafe. I'm Bert Lum.
And I'm Ryan Ozawa, and we're talking to Ben Trevino and Aaron Landry about the business model for sharing.
And of course, you can give us a call here at 941-3689 on Oahu, or 877-941-3689 from the neighbor islands. And we were talking right before the break about just the idea of modeling, and I would love to see what the algorithms are in the back office on looking and following how these cars or bikes are moving through the community. And I wanted to get you both to talk a little bit about what you need to understand before you move from one community and expand perhaps to the next community. And maybe, Aaron, you can start with, where are you starting this service in? Where is it going to start? And how do you determine whether you need to expand it to someplace else?
Okay. Well, some of the first steps that we take, you look at where are people living, where are they working, and you try to come up with an idea of like how are people making their commutes now. We also look at like how are people commuting from long distances, and like maybe what are these populations like, and would they consider taking a bus or carpooling in if they knew that they now would have a car available in the urban core.
Mm-hmm.
So we look at those things first. And there's some data we can look at, but some of the stuff is actually it's data that you can't really get unless you go to the neighborhoods themselves. And so we've been spending a ton of time going to neighborhood boards and different community organizations and talking a little bit about what this is and finding out what the reaction is and finding out what different people's needs are in terms of not just in terms of needing cars, but also what the parking issues in different neighborhoods are. And they're very different. Like parking in Waikiki and how people perceive parking and cars is very, very different than Makiki, for example. So we're taking in a lot of that feedback, and that's going to help shape how our what we call a home area would look like in terms of where the primary area of our service would be.
Mm-hmm.
I like the way that you described that one scenario. Say, I would take the bus into town, except sometimes I need to run an errand during lunch, or sometimes I need to pick something up. So I drive my car just in case I need it, but otherwise my car sits in that parking lot downtown all day, versus I can use these other options, and I can now just hop a bike or I can borrow a car for just 1 hour to get something done. So I think also going to communities and sharing those scenarios are important. So Ben, for bikes, I know we have that beautiful new bike track on South King Street, and that's probably one place where you might put at an intersecting point for your first deployment. But where are you looking for the hub, the heat map red dot for bike share deployment for Bike Share Hawaii?
Well, we expect a lot of the activity, frankly, to come from Waikiki. Waikiki, I'm not sure if everyone knows this, but is as dense as Manhattan. There's an extremely high number of residents there, plus all the visitors, obviously, is what we think about. But because of that density, it becomes a great source for both trip origins and trip destinations. And we think a lot of the bike share activity is going to be focused around Waikiki. The rest of the service region extends all the way to Chinatown. We also expect a lot of downtown activity, and then throughout that corridor, there's a nice mix of residential and commercial and retail activity. There's Ala Moana Shopping Center, Kakaka, which is going to be extremely dense very soon as well. Mm-hmm. And then we hope to also extend out into Makiki, our other high density residential zone. So when we're thinking about expansion, there's a few. We think about all the same things that Aaron talked about: demographics, the land use mix in an area. But another consideration for bikes is topography, right? So outside the region that we are about to deploy, as soon as you start to extend even a little bit outside of it, you start to run into some grade. And when people have to bike up hills, they don't always opt to do that, which creates an additional operational cost for the bike share operation when we have to rebalance around the fringes and then move bikes up hills where people might not otherwise take them. And so it raises some interesting questions because one of the new technological directions for bicycling is e-bikes, these electric assist bikes or bikes that have some kind of motor that will help give you an extra boost when you need it for something like a hill. And so that's a consideration. That's one of the things that we're thinking about going forward for both the expansion of the Honolulu system and for other communities that might have more grade associated.
Yeah, I want to hear a little bit more about that because where does a bike become a motorcycle or something else when you got a sort of an extra boost on it? We're talking to Ben Trevino from Bike Share and Aaron Landry from Car2Go. And of course, if you have a comment or question, feel free to give us a call here. That number is 941-3689. Or from the neighbor islands, you can give us a call, 877-941-3689. We want to welcome Paul from Maui to Bike Marks Cafe. Welcome to the show. Sure. Thank you. Great question, Aaron.
That is a wonderful question. Obviously, we want to work with people who are visiting from neighbor islands. We don't have all the nuts and bolts worked out on that yet, but that's definitely something that we want to work with because I know a lot of people who will travel from Maui or from the Big Island or Kauai and just come here for day trips and just have maybe 1 or 2 meetings and then fly back. So we want to be able to provide that solution, but there's a lot of logistics in terms of working with the airport and also working with parking. So it's something that we're working on, but it's nothing I can.
So from a logistics standpoint, are you now competing with the rental car units, and or is it just a matter of getting a lot and putting some Car2Go cars at the lot and having visitors come in and grab them and go to their destination?
Well, different Car2Go cities, and we're in 29 other cities. The airport parking situation is handled differently depending on, and sometimes there's a remote lot that there's a shuttle. Sometimes there's parking right at the airport, or sometimes the shuttle goes quite a distance away if the airport is far from the urban core. So there's a bunch of scenarios, and it's something we're working on. But
okay.
Well, the scenario, I just traveled to Kauai and rented a car to go to a single event the entire day, and if my car could have been used by someone else while I was at that single location, I think that a lot of people can see the benefit of that. There was a second question, though.
Yeah, Paul, did you...
No, that's...
Okay, so...
So the way that gas works is that when you use Car2Go, it includes insurance, it includes gas, it includes parking. And so if you get a vehicle that has 20% or less fuel in it, there's a gas card inside the car. So if you take it to a gas station and fill it up yourself, we'll give you credit on your account. So to more than compensate you for the time that you spent to fill up our vehicles, because it benefits. It's a win-win for everybody. If you're able to fuel our car, we're going to give you some free minutes to use.
Well, thanks, Paul, for calling those questions. Yeah, thanks.
Hello.
So, and I'm just curious. I mean, are you thinking about expanding beyond Oahu, and are you considering the neighbor islands as well?
We are. I mean, obviously, we're looking at everything.
Not immediately,
but yeah, not immediately. The solution that Car2Go has really works in tightly knit and urban areas. That's not to say it doesn't work in other areas, but it works the best in places that are congested, because not just traffic congestion, but also parking congestion. And that's really where it shines. But that's not to say that in the future we'll be able to refine things and work in more rural areas.
Now, one of the other things when we talk about logistics that occurs to me, I mean, it's good, for example, to hear the Car2Go covers parking cost, insurance. Obviously, there's going to be a qualification program to be in the Car2Go program. But with bike share, I can imagine someone might like their bike share bike a little too much. So what measures do you see in place that if somebody says, not only do I don't want to share this bike anymore, I want to take it home with me and just disappear off the radar? I mean, what are you doing for that?
They're very sexy bikes, so I can see why somebody might want to take home one of these giant clunker bicycles. But so one of the interesting things about the system design is that when you check out a bike with bike share, you typically have to use a credit card to pay for it, right? The way the kiosk works is they don't accept cash, they accept credit cards. And one nice byproduct of that is that whenever a bike is out, it has an identity associated with it. So if you walk off with a bike or you lose it, you are on the hook for it, for this asset that is worth, $1,000 to $1,500, which is a significant deterrent to anyone taking
It's
the bike
on your
home.
card.
Yeah, you're responsible for it. And basically, when you have this bike, you want to return it as quickly as possible. One, because you're being charged for the time that you're using it, and two, because now you have this responsibility for this asset.
So Ben, I mean, I think a lot of the sharing business startups that are being suggested here rely a high degree on the technology that's really supporting it. So whether it's Car2Go or in the case of bike share, what kinds of technology is really inherent or integrated with the bike so that it gives you the good kind of data that you're looking for to find out where are people taking it, what path are they taking, and where are they dropping it off?
Right. I think that's an extremely salient point when it comes to bike sharing, because bike sharing as a concept has been around for probably 100 years, and there have been attempts to make these things work in other cities where the idea is like you can have these public bikes and it'd be great if everyone could access them, except that they walk away or
They all
get
end up at
trashed.
the beach.
Yep, they end up in a trench somewhere, right? Just because people thought that would be a good thing to do with bikes. And but what technology enabled bikes, this very old technology, to become was integrated into this network that allowed operators to manage a large fleet of bikes in a way that kept them well maintained, free of vandalism, and was able to communicate to people where they were. And so it's essentially this combination of automated payments, right? Do you have a payment kiosk that's something that we see that's very common in like parking structures, right? There's communication technology, so cellular cards in those kiosks so you can communicate the location of bikes as the network is churning. Solar power, which means that you can lay down stations, this light infrastructure anywhere in the city without having to trench or do any major excavation that might also deter the rollout of equipment, and that's basically and then custom bike design that is also a deterrent for theft and lets you have very strong security and make sure that bikes don't get pulled out of docks.
So is there any geolocation associated with the bike itself?
Sometimes in some systems. So that's another good question, and it highlights the difference in two major kinds of bike sharing systems. So there's what are called smart docks and what are called smart bikes. And the difference is that with smart docks, all of the telecommunications technology is embedded in the kiosk and docking points. And so the way you know where a bike is, it checks into a dock, and that dock knows where it is.
Right.
With smart bikes, all of the the technology is embedded on the bike, and so there's some kind of GPS that tells, like with Car2Go, here is where I am. So when it gets returned, quote unquote, to the system, it can let you know where to find it, right? Because the app has to tell you this is where this bike is. It's not at a designated docking station necessarily.
Is
and
that
so
the
the
kind
GPS
of bikes
is
that you
required.
guys are deploying?
So we're evaluating, we're considering both options, and we're going to figure out from the proposals what's best for this community, and it might be different for different communities in the state.
Now, Aaron, for Car2Go, I mean, that I imagine a lot of those things are also in place in a car sharing system in terms of the technology pieces. Is there anything that you wanted to highlight in terms of what the app does or what the data does to help this system work better in a city?
It's very, very similar in regards. Like, so when a car gets parked, then it phones home and says, "Hey, this is my location. This is how much fuel I have. This is if somebody reported any damage, or if the fuel lights, or I'm sorry,
Engine
like,
lights
and if anything that's going on with the car after it gets parked, it reports home and says, "Hey, this is my condition," and if it's in good condition, which most of the time, obviously, it would be, then it shows up on the app for people to be able to find.
And one of the things that I've been imagining, and you can tell me if I'm crazy, whether it's a bike or a car, wouldn't it be kind of neat if I could say, "Hey, wow, I'm getting on this bike, and this bike spent a lot of time in Waikiki," or this bike was last in Hawaii Kai. How interesting is that? I mean, is that something?
Why do you want to know where that bike
Well,
was?
it's like those dollar
Like the
bills.
dollar
that people-
bills?
Yeah, I want to know where my. Is that
Well,
something that people are doing?
You know that we're going to do that.
All right.
No, what is that?
Well,
What is that?
actually, if I could interrupt, we are not going to do that because
Okay.
it's a privacy
Yes,
issue with us.
I can see
So
that.
when somebody we can't reveal who had the car before you, where it was, or anything like that. We just want to treat it. This is your car for right now.
Got it.
Well,
Where can-
both of your programs are coming soon, so people need to go somewhere to find out, maybe sign up to be notified. Where can we find more information on Car2Go Honolulu, Aaron?
So Car2Go is CAR2
The number two.
GO, the number 2. So CAR, the number 2, GO.com. And there isn't a Honolulu specific site yet, but you can follow us on Twitter at Car2Go Honolulu.
Fantastic.
And there's going to be more to come.
Stay tuned.
And then?
Ben?
You can find more information about Bike Share Hawaii at bikesharehawaii.org. We have a Facebook page, a Twitter account, Bike Share HI, and an Instagram account, Bike Share Hawaii.
Fantastic.
Sounds good. We will put that all up on our show notes tonight. Ben Trevino is the president, COO of Bike Share Hawaii. Aaron Landry is the general manager of Car2Go Honolulu. We want to thank you both for joining us today.
This is great. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
And thank you for listening to Bite Marks Cafe. Join us next week when we'll learn about the challenges and rewards of being a communicator for science.
Wow. If you missed any part of this edition, you can find the podcast of tonight's show on bitemarkscafe.org. And if you have any comments or suggestions, you can email us at feedback@bitemarks.org. And of course, you can find us on Twitter. I'm at Bitemarks.
You can follow me at Hawaii. Our engineer is David Chung, and our executive producer is Beth Ann Cosley.
And we leave you with our song pick of the week. Here's a band called Soft Sleep and a song called Unravel. See you next week on another edition of Bite Marks Cafe. Woohoo! Now we do the second show.
Yeah, you got to do one with Wei, right? This
Way's coming in.
stuff.
Yeah.
That's very
Science
cool.
Communicators. That's not going to air till the 17th.
Oh, that's happening. Oh, that's the Science Communicators one.
Yeah.
That's going on right
Yeah, right now. Yeah, right. At 6:45. I got to go on a trip. I got to leave tomorrow.
Saipan?
Where are you going?
Saipan.
For what?
I got to teach a class.
Wow.
A social media class.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I've never been to Saipan.
Huh?
Nobody's
Never
been there.
It's a little tiny island. It's the size of Kaho'olawe.